Hi, it's Jack Gately from Jack Gately Real Estate, and I wanted to make a video today about basic steps of the sale, and this would be for a single family home, Um, there's other condos and commercial property, whatever, but we're going to focus on single family home from being the perspective of the list agent. From the list agent perspective, I suppose we could make a different video on a different time from the buyer agent perspective, but today we're going to focus on the list agent perspective. And, in my opinion, of course, it's always better to be working with sellers rather than buyers. A lot of different intangible benefits to working with sellers. Not to say that we don't work with buyers, but in order to grow your business, working with sellers tends to have a lot of spin-off effects, not the least of which, of course, just some basics. You can't hold an open house at the home of your buyer. You can't have a sign out front of the home of your buyer. So a lot of different spin-off effects relative to working with sellers. So let's just get right into it. The number one step of the sale, this is kind of a little bit facetious here, but it's getting leads by far. You can master every other one of these steps that we'll talk about today, but if you have not yet mastered step number one, getting your phone to ring or your cell phone text message or Facebook message or email or whatever it happens to be by which you receive leads, if you can't get leads, then doesn't really matter if you know every other step after that, because you won't be doing them. So if I was a new agent, and it's just my little new agent spin here, if I was a new agent, I'd probably spend 95% of my time focusing on how to get leads more than anything else. And certainly in many other videos, we talk about exactly how you might do that. And of course, as a veteran agent, you want to spend a vast majority of your time getting leads. And once you kind of get going with doing transactions, one of the biggest challenges you'll have is managing those transactions while also generating new leads. What you don't want to do is be in the process of doing 4 or 5, 6 different transactions and then completely drop the ball on creating new business for you. So yes, while you'll have 5 or 6 closings or whatever, and then all of a sudden when those are done, you'll be like starting back from zero again. So you want to always be doing lead generation every single day. So let's just assume that you have a lead and you've converted that lead into a listing appointment, and that would be great. You're going to go over to someone's house and you're hopefully going to bring the listing agreement with you, and they're going to sign it, and you're going to be their listing agent. Okay, so that's kind of the step one as a real estate agent, or step two, I should say, of getting the business, right? Got to go out and get that business, got to go sit down at someone's kitchen counter and actually ask them for the business. Then you're going to spring into action and market the property, right? Of course, you're going to put it into the MLS, you're going to take the pictures, you're going to do the video, you're going to do open houses, all those types of things to market the property. Whatever it happens to be, maybe you'll door knock, which is not a bad idea, in the neighborhood. Hey, we have a listing coming up. Oh, you're going to put up the sign, all those type of traditional type of things that real estate agents do. And then step 4 is going to be, hopefully you're going to receive an offer. Ooh, yay, you got an offer, fantastic. But remember, it has to be not only an offer, but you have to get acceptance of the offer. Very, very important. The seller actually has to accept the offer, and sometimes sellers don't always accept offers. There might be a period of counter offers, offer and counter offer, back and forth. Nonetheless, Remember, when you do receive the offer, you must send it to your seller client forthwith. In other words, once you receive it, you must send it right along, usually by email, to your seller. I'd be also, just a note of caution here, you do not want to forward the email that you received from the buyer agent. Instead, you should download the offer as a document and then upload it to a separate email which you communicate with your seller. You should keep your communication with your seller strictly between you and your seller. Your seller should never be carbon copied on any email that cross-references the buyer agent in any way, shape, or form. You don't want to cross the streams, so to speak. All right, step number 5, assuming that they've accepted the offer, there'll be a home inspection. Typically, this will be in 7 to 10 days from the accepted offer, and typically in the offer, they'll have approximately 10 days to not only accomplish this, but get back to you about their findings. Keep in mind that the buyer, in the most conventional home inspection language, can back out of the deal at their sole discretion at this point and get their deposit back. So the buyer really doesn't have a lot at risk. They can back out within this time window for any real reason at all. I mean, they could just walk in and say, gee, I don't like, in fact, they don't even have to give a reason. It's at their sole discretion. So they'll have about 7 to 10 days to accomplish that task. You should then expect step 6, which this is going to be variable based upon the market and the location. Vary upon market for sure. There could be a period of renegotiation, in which case the buyer comes back and says, hey, we found these 7 or 8 things that are wrong with the property, and we either want you to A, fix, or B, give us money off. So that will be a very interesting time for you to negotiate these things with your seller. Sometimes the seller will say, no, let them pound sand. And some other times, depending upon the market, the seller will be like, oh yeah, anything they want. So, and everything in between. So there's going to be this period where there's this negotiation going on between the buyer and seller before the home inspection window finally closes. Then you're going to move right along to the purchase and sale agreement. Now, again, all these times that I'm giving you here are just rough estimates, and each transaction, I should obviously say, is going to have significant variables to them. But roughly speaking, this is about 15 days after the offer. About 15 days after the offer. There's going to be a deadline in here. Of course, whenever you set up one of these things, you're always going to consult the calendar and factor in any type of holidays and that type of thing. But usually about 15 days after the offer. So that would also mean that this is about 5 days after the end of the home inspection. You're going to want to make sure that any carryover language from the offer, especially any inclusions like the washer and dryer, or any exclusions like, for instance, making sure that the swing set is removed by the seller, anything like that, making sure that the seller will be taking the chandelier, that's the family heirloom, anything like that is going to have to be included in this purchase and sale. So make sure that you consult the offer so that you carry over that language to the purchase and sale agreement. This will also be the time, usually when the attorneys, if the buyer and seller have attorneys, which is extremely likely in this day and age, this is usually when the attorneys are going to play a much bigger role. Now, just a quick note on that, you probably want to at least open up communication with the attorney prior to this. So as soon as your client indicates that they have an attorney, get that information from them. And at the very least, just before this happens, you want to send over an email just introducing yourself, especially if you haven't interacted with that attorney in the past. And so now after that, by the way, this is about 15 days after. So we're about 2 weeks into the process. Then sometime in the next week or two after the purchase and sale is completed, there'll be an appraiser who contacts you, the list agent, and they'll be asking to set up an appraisal appointment. A couple of points of practice here that I would strongly recommend. You should go to the appraisal. You should go to the appraisal, meet the appraiser there, and, help them with the property. If they need a copy of the purchase and sale, that's great. But, most appraisers, they've done this before, and they don't need too much help from you. So, again, here, in most cases, you're going to be better served by just providing with them a copy of the purchase and sale, saying, this is the house. If you need anything, I'll be here in the kitchen. Otherwise, just let them go do their job. Being overbearing with the appraiser, nothing could be worse. You just want to kind of be low profile, so to speak. And so this is, of course, the opportunity for the lender to look at the one of two things that they look at. They, of course, look at the buyer's ability to pay, and this is the second step, which is looking at the value of the asset that they're lending against. So very important step here, the appraisal. Once the appraisal goes back to the bank was then going to make sure they have all the documents from the borrower, and then they will finally make a decision, are they actually going to do the loan? And if they are going to do the loan, then they will issue the borrower a mortgage commitment letter. By the way, in the offer and in the purchase and sale, there'll be usually a deadline to accomplish the receipt of this mortgage commitment letter. General rule of thumb, this is going to be after the offer plus 30 days. So this is like a month into the process. And if the buyer cannot achieve this mortgage commitment letter by this deadline, they could do a couple of things. First off, they could ask for an extension, which is probably the first thing they'll do. And then after that, if they can't get the mortgage commitment letter, they'll probably back out of the deal. Ouch. And again, they'll get the refund of the deposit. So here are a second opportunity for the buyer to back out without a heck of a lot of negative consequences. Certainly, they've spent money on the home inspection and maybe some other things along the way, but they get their deposit back as long as they asked for it before the deadline expires. I usually think that once we pass the mortgage commitment point, this is usually when I feel very, very strongly that we're going to have a closing on this property. So this is actually usually when I go out and put up the sold sign. And by the way, that's a great opportunity for you to create a little bit of content for yourself and put up the sold sign, put it up on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you happen to be, make a little video. And, usually when you pass this date, it's for the most part, you're going to have a closing. Couple quick notes. If you represent the buyer, it is, at the very least, the proper practice, I think, to be courteous and let the seller side know that you did, in fact, receive the mortgage commitment. Now, a lot of buyer agents do that, but some buyer agents don't. I would think from a buyer agent point of view, a simple email letting the listing agent know, hey, we got the mortgage commitment, we're all set, we're good to go. Some even provide the letter. That's not bad either. You could provide the letter if you wanted to, but at the very least, an email is the nice, courteous thing to do. But this video is from the seller agent perspective or the list agent, so let's get right back to that. Once we have the mortgage commitment, then there's a couple of things that have to happen right around this time, and this is going to be, roughly speaking, things that you kind of have to put into action. and one is going to be an inspection from the fire department. They are going to have to check on the smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. So you might actually want to order this just a little bit before the mortgage commitment. Usually I order it a little bit before, and if I happen to be down at the fire department, I could almost pick the date that it occurs. Simultaneously with this, I also talked to the water department in town or in the city, and we're going to get our water and, if applicable, our sewer reading done. Now, a lot of times you can get that done from the outside of the property, and they don't actually have to come inside. But I just sold a property where they actually had to come inside the house to do it, and because I ordered these things in advance, I actually scheduled them for the exact same time, and it saved me a trip to the property. So if you can, I usually like to order these things or get the ball rolling, so to speak, 3 weeks prior to closing. 3 weeks prior to closing. At least order them 3 weeks prior to closing. And that way, if, for instance, they don't pass the fire inspection, which totally can happen, especially since December 2016, they've gotten a little bit stricter on the regulations, there's a chance for the fire department to come back before the actual closing date. Now you're ready for the walkthrough. As a general rule of thumb, this totally could vary. Let's just say that we have a closing at 10 a.m. Typically, the walkthrough will be at 9 a.m. that same morning. You'll coordinate with the buyer agent to figure out what time this is going to be, but usually it is set up after the closing is set up, because clearly you don't want the walkthrough after the closing, of course. So once the closing time and place is set up, then usually immediately thereafter there's an email between the agents and they confirm the walkthrough time. Just a quick note as well, the home inspection time is almost always dictated by the buyer side. So usually the buyer side will just simply inform the list agent when the home inspection will be done. Usually, of course, during business day hours, and usually they'll give you several days notice. So just as a note, it's usually the buyer side that can dictate when the home inspection happens. Otherwise, it becomes a scheduling nightmare. But as a general rule of thumb, your walkthrough is done 9 a.m. for a 10 a.m. closing. I would strongly try to get there the day before, if it was me, because I'd stroll by there at 4 or 5 o'clock at night or in the afternoon the day before to make sure that it's in walkthrough condition. I like to sleep at night, and I don't like to worry about this overnight, get up, and then drive over there for the first time. I'd rather find out the day before if there's anything left behind or just things that are messy or whatever it happens to be. It's usually a 10 or 15 minute little thing that you can fix. You can throw a extra thing in the back of your car, just something that they forgot. Sometimes you actually find something that the seller wanted but actually left behind. So I usually go to my properties the day before the actual walkthrough, and so I do a pre-walkthrough. And you'll go over to, highly likely, the Registry of Deeds or a law firm office or even a real estate office. Closing could actually happen pretty much anywhere. You'll have your closing, which is great, and everyone signs things, and when people sign things, they think they're done, but actually you're not done, and you haven't actually sold the house until you're on record. And so if you do the closing at the Registry of Deeds, highly likely the closing will go on record at that same time. The lawyer will excuse themselves from the table, they'll walk over to the counter, and they'll actually go on record simultaneously, and then they'll come back to the table and say, hey, we're on record, the transaction is closed. If you do it someplace else, like a lawyer's office or real estate office, then you have to wait for the lawyer to get over to the Registry of Deeds in most cases before the transaction is actually closed. Nonetheless, until you are actually on record, and you could always check this by using the Registry of Deeds website, you should only give out the keys after you're on record, not before. Because technically before, the transaction has not yet closed. So you should not give out the keys until you are on record. You should also not give out the check that goes to the buyer side agency until you are on record. And there will be occasions when, as the list agent, you might have to say to the buyer's agent, as soon as we are on record, then we'll distribute the keys. And then we'll pay the commission to the buyer side agency, but not before. And you just have to kind of stick up and for yourself and for your agency and for your client, and just be polite but affirmative and assertive that those things will not be distributed until actually the deal is closed. So, hey, I'm Jack Gately from Jack Gately Real Estate. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, don't forget to email me, jack@jackgately.com, and have a great day.